record button. And ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jon Taylor.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. So as promised, I was wrapping my head around more about restoration and restitution. So we're going to do restoration 2 today. And where my mind went when Scott and some of you said we need to do more around this, there's a ton more to be spoken about what's taken in addiction and what needs to be restored there. But I'm going to take a little more of a global look today because I think this principle underpins why restoration is such an important principle in relationships. So I'm going to start by looking at things that fall under the communal responsibility category. So things that no one person is responsible for, no one person can do by themselves. We all kind of have to do it together. So things like the climate and our planet, there's not one person that's going to find a solution for that or enact a solution that works for everybody. We all have to work together to take care of our environment, to leave it better off than when we found it. Laws that are made and the enforcement of those laws. While we may delegate some of the day-to-day work of that to, law enforcement or lawmakers, the fact that that exists comes from communities recognizing we have a duty towards each other, and there are things that as a community we are okay with, and things as a community that we're not okay with. And it's our responsibility as a community to define what that is and to provide, to empower the ability to make and enforce laws for the benefit of everybody. I look at in the United States, the way the education system works. Where I live, a lot of that is funded through property taxes. And you pay that part of the property tax whether or not you have a kid participating in the school system. Because there's a communal responsibility to educate and inform the upcoming generation. There's a communal benefit to having a populace that is educated. So it's something that we all take responsibility for. Even when it comes to like in the classroom, yes, the teacher's the person there with the children or with the students hands-on, but at least where I live, we start to see some breakdowns when that's where we put the only responsibility for educating people on. It only works if we all take responsibility for this. I do a lot of work with a trails maintenance organization in my city. In fact, I'm really passionate about it. It's something I really love doing. And the other day I was on a bike ride with some people that I didn't know very well. And the topic of trails management came up, and I mentioned that I was on this committee that takes care of the trails. And the rider that was just behind me for the rest of the ride would say things like, "Oh, and tell them that this and this and this needs to happen." And after about 20 minutes of that, I stopped my bike and I turned around and I said, "Who do you think them is?" And she said, "The people who take care of the trails." And I said, "I'm them. Like, I don't advise other people. Like, there's a problem, I go out and fix it. The people who adopt the trails, they go out and fix it. Like, there's not anyone paid to go complain to. These are all volunteers." And she looked kind of surprised. And I said, "How did you think it worked?" And she said, "I don't know. I just thought it was like a city park." And I said, "It's kind of like a city park, but it's really all of us who use this. And all of us who benefit from this, we're all responsible here. It's a communal responsibility." Manners and social norms. Again, that comes from a recognition that as a community, we have a basic level of decency that we owe each other. And we're all responsible for that. That's why when somebody uses their cell phone in a movie theater, everybody looks at them like, "What's your problem?" Or when somebody screams at restaurant staff, there are norms and there are manners that we agree as a community we're all responsible for upholding this. These exist because there are some things that we're all responsible for, and I would put something else under that category. I think the responsibility of making sure that people are parented adequately and can reach adulthood functionally is a communal responsibility. In a justice system, the person who did the crime does the time. In communal responsibility, we all chip in because we all bear responsibility and we all benefit. One of the biggest things, and this, I'm so thankful that over the last, probably say over the last 20 years, this has really come to light, the impact of childhood trauma and misattunement on adults. When things don't go right in childhood, things can't go right in adulthood. So the reason why I think this applies to restoration is in romantic committed relationships, your partner comes to the relationship with things that were taken from them in childhood. Things that they had that were taken away. Maybe a parent died, maybe there was a divorce, maybe there was safety that was interrupted by war or violence, or things that they should have had that were taken away. I think every child is entitled to be raised in a loving home. I think every child is entitled to get the care and attention that they deserve. I think every child is entitled to not worry about, if physical violence is going to happen to them or not. And your partner came to you in your relationship with a unique mix of things that were taken from them before you ever came to the scene. What hurts does your partner carry from past relationships that are not yet healed? Maybe, in the dating constellation before you two got together, there were relationships that really messed with your partner. There were relationships that really upset some things. That goes into what Carl Jung would call the collective unconscious. It goes into the water that we all swim in, and it really does affect all of us. When I look at behavior that would be considered antisocial, I'm not talking about like the diagnosis, antisocial personality disorder. I'm talking about behavior that is not supportive of social bonds. I would say 100% of the time that comes from ruptures that happened way back when. So in a secure functioning relationship, Stan Tatkin talks about one of the principles being when one of us is in distress, the other one drops everything to attend to that person, whether or not they cause the hurt. So again, it's that responsibility. It doesn't matter why you're hurting. It doesn't matter why you're reeling. It's my job as your partner to come to your assistance. And I would say that extends even beyond the person that you are romantically involved with or committed to. It's my belief that that's our responsibility towards each other as human beings. And here's why. Like it or not, you received your partner, or you received your neighbor, or you received everybody around you in a state of the parenting they needed had not been completed. There isn't a person alive who gets adequate parenting. We all come out a little unfinished, either because a parent dies too soon or misattunes too soon, or simply didn't have the capacity to give us what we needed. So we're all a work in progress. And especially in a committed relationship, that's one of the roles you take up, is you are now this person's parent, not in a creepy way and not in a controlling way, but in that way of everybody needs somebody in their life who will watch out for their well-being, who will nurture them, who will protect them, and who will give them guidance. Especially in a committed relationship, like it or not, that's one of the things you signed up for. So the way that healing trauma works is it actually doesn't happen by going to your therapist and talking about what happened in the past and what you feel about it. That's not the mechanism that heals the trauma. That helps to set the stage so that the feelings are activated. And what heals the trauma is when those feelings are activated, the person gets to experience care, attunement, being held, being witnessed, being stuck with as they work through something difficult. Trauma healing doesn't come because your therapist or your partner says the right thing at the right time. Although sometimes the right words are the vehicle for that kind of caring. It's the way that memory works. When I access an old memory, that network is active and it's pliable. And what I experience in this moment with that memory will influence how that memory is put away. So if I'm back in my childhood insecurity place and my partner sees that and they treat me with care or they treat me with attunement, I'll say they treat me with attunement because attunement means a lot of different things, and we'll get into that in a minute here. When they treat me with attunement, that memory is put back a little more healed, a little less painful than it was before. The narrative updates. In trauma, our perspectives get fixed. The world is this way. I can count on this. I can't count on this. And that's fine as long as we're in the relationship where the trauma was caused. When we get into a new relationship and we come in with those fixed perspectives, we're sunk and our partner is sunk, because we may be operating on something that's no longer true, or something that will only become true if we insist on that's the way that the world is. So when I say care, the care we give our partner when their trauma is up or when their hurt is up, it can look like things like helping your partner look at a loving reality, or in a loving way, help your partner look at reality. No, that's not how it is. I'm not looking for any reason to kick you to the curb. I'm really frustrated with you right now, and I want some things to change, but I've got a lot more in me than you think. The loving turn to reality can be, no, you're angry and that's okay. No, you're hurt and that makes sense. I understand that. One of the ways that we cope with trauma all by ourselves is to twist reality into a version that we can accept, or at least we feel like we understand. I've heard it said before that reality is the only nurturing mother out there. And so one of the ways we care and support each other is we lovingly help each other see reality for what it is. And with that, I think comes the commitment, and I'll be right here with you as you face that. Yeah, this is a reality that you don't want. Yeah, this is something that's hard for you to face, but you don't have to do it alone. I'm here. Care can be softness. I think of, my task as a parent raising kids. There are times where the last thing that I feel like I can give is softness, but it's what's called for. When a kid is struggling, when they're scared, when they're anxious, they need softness. Seeing somebody, just seeing, no advice, no let's change this, just I see you. I think one of the most painful underlying aspects of any kind of childhood trauma is at some point in that intense experience, we were alone. Whether that's we were by ourselves and we had no advocate around when abuse happened, or when we went through something terrible, nobody was willing to talk about it afterward. So that ability to give somebody the gift of being seen, I see you, that must be so hard. I can see that you're hurting. Offering help that you can give. I think that's the best kind of help to offer, not necessarily what is needed, because when we orient I'll give you what you need at all times, we can put ourselves in a position of burnout, and we can put ourselves in a position of resentment. I'll give you all that I can, I think, is the kind of help that makes a big difference long term, because it allows us to show up consistently for somebody in need. I've got a young man, he's been in my life since I was in my early 20s, and he was a teenager. So he's in his early 20s now, and is newly married. And I know I can always pick up the phone when he calls. He doesn't have to wait days for me to return his call. And oftentimes now when he calls me, there's not a whole lot I can do. And I'll even ask him, is there anything I can do? And I'll say, no, I just needed to talk. I just needed somebody to listen. That's the help I can give consistently, and he relies on it. It helps. We can give a calm space to work things through and learn. This is, part of that restoration of what was taken in childhood. I think of couples in recovery who make the commitment to each other. I'll make sure that you can get to your meetings and your therapy and your support as much as you need. I'll handle the kids. I'll handle this responsibility. We'll free the money up, whatever that is. I think that doesn't only address what happened in addiction. I think that goes back to childhood for a lot of people in recovery. There was never time enough or focus enough to really, you get to be hurt, you get to be in a position where you need to heal, and we're gonna make sure that that's supported until you're done. Unconditional valuation, I think, is another way we can give care. You're worth it. I'm willing. We can do this. The only accounts that I follow on Instagram are like Good News Network and Global Positive News, things like that. And they're chock full of stories like this where strangers do this for each other. And it's effective. You don't have to have a history or a complete understanding of someone to be able to do this stuff. And I think that it's part of that restoration idea that communally we're responsible for. We've created so many issues in this world, or we haven't solved so many issues in this world as a group, as a globe, that affect how children are hurt. And so we all have a responsibility to be a line of healing, a line of care in response to that, especially in our intimate relationships. If you chose somebody, you chose their baggage too. And if you're continuing to choose them, you're continuing to choose their baggage. And while I am a big advocate for holding a line for responsibility and accountability, and hey, you need to work on this, I don't think that's mutually exclusive from what Stan Tatkin calls finding the baby. Where are you hurt, and what can I give you there? So a couple questions to think about as we close out here. If there was something simple you could do that would make somebody's life dramatically better, why wouldn't you? Everybody probably has real reasons coming up, and I would encourage you to write those down and just look at them. They may be valid reasons not to. They may be also something that you put in the way of, you put in between you and being vulnerable and connected with another human being, because vulnerable connection is one of the most terrifying things that we do. What would be more compelling to you that would get in the way of you being able to do something simple that would greatly help another person? Think about that for a minute. And again, there may be valid things that come up. It also may be, it's easier for me this way. On the other side, if you're someone who's in pain and you need help, if you have, I shouldn't say if, those childhood wounds you have that you carry around, and that fear you have, what if nobody will help me? That's a real fear. And the question I would ask you to consider is, what if you don't keep trying? What if you don't keep putting it out there? I know in my own experience, I learned that if I didn't keep putting it out there, I would definitely live in the same world I did as a child, which was isolated and lonely and overwhelming. And I don't even know how many years I felt like I kept risking that before things started clicking and I started actually experiencing a different world. And I'm glad that I kept trying. It wasn't easy. But again, in so many things we do in relationships, it's a two-person system. It's not up to everybody to see the wounds you have and to understand and help you. It's also up for you to voice what you need, or if you don't know what you need, at the very least, to be able to voice when you're hurting. So that is restoration 2, giving your partner what they missed out in childhood.
Thank you, Jon. For those of you who missed the first session of restoration or restitution, it was sparked by, Jon had read a book by Terry Crews, and Terry Crews was a porn addict who had obviously betrayed his wife with that, and was talking about how difficult it is to make things right. Can you ever make up for the betrayal? And it sparked an incredibly interesting conversation. I put the link in the chat feature, and if you were not here for that, I encourage you to go back and click on that link and do that. And yeah, I love this part of it. We are all damaged. We all walk into any relationship with a whole lot of baggage. And it's our job in relationship with people. And I love that you made this bigger, but in relationship with people, especially our partners, to attune to that and to be there, and to see and to hear and to do what we can, not to promise what we can't or try to do or, develop. But, I go back to my childhood. I never felt seen. I never felt heard. As an adult, it wasn't talking to and you hit this too. It's not really working through it with your therapist. It's taking it out into the world and having people respond in healthy ways. And that's how I got over my trauma of not feeling seen or heard, was in recovery settings, mostly sharing and then feeling seen and heard, and people reaching out and giving what they could, which was sometimes a hug, sometimes their own story, to let me know they related or whatever. And it was a beautiful thing. And in it, I'm not in an intimate relationship, but if I was, this is what I would want. And whatever I had done to make things worse, I'm the addict here. This is what I would want to give as a way of making it right. Consistently, I want to give this. I would want to be the person who is there for my partner in a loving, caring, not controlling way. And is there, you talk about find the baby and parenting your partner. How do we, this is my question for you, Jon, how do we walk that fine line of doing what's needed without doing what's not wanted because it's too much, without being controlling?
I think the very best gauge for am I doing enough or too much is watch your partner's face, watch their eyes. They'll tell you if how you're intervening or how you're helping is not helpful. You'll see pain come across their face, or you'll see surprise, or you'll see anger. If what you're doing is working, you'll actually see them relax. You'll feel them slow down. I was working with a couple just the other day, and we were role playing. We were putting on a show of some of the most difficult moments they have to manage each other. And the partner who was the manager, let me help you. They were so effective at the relief they were giving their partner. Their partner couldn't get into character as their most difficult self anymore. They said, I can't wind it up when she's doing this stuff to me. And the key there wasn't that, this partner was a master in knowing how to soothe. She just watched him close. And she was willing to try a few different things. And at one point, she tried 2 or 3 things and it wasn't working. And she just said, I can't figure you out right now. And he relaxed. Like, it's just that watch close. If you're watching close and you're feeling your feelings, I would say more often than not, your intuition will lead you in a good direction. But the mistake we make is when we pull back from the actual interaction and we get this plan in our head, this is what I'm going to do to fix you. And then it's almost like we do it with our eyes closed. You wouldn't want your surgeon operating on you with your eyes closed. You want them awake and alert and paying attention. And it's the same thing in our relationships. That's how to walk the fine line, is take the feedback if it's not working and stop for a minute, regroup, reorganize, just ask. How's that feeling for you? Find out.
Yeah. And, Bessel, van der Kolk, and various other people have done the research. Often, particularly in childhood, worse than an actual trauma is the fact that the trauma is never dealt with, never discussed, never. And, that was certainly my experience growing up. It wasn't so much what happened, it was that none of it was ever acknowledged or dealt with. And just to have somebody there trying to acknowledge and deal would be a very calming thing for me. And I think that's what you just described. It's like, even if I don't know exactly what you're feeling or how to fix it, or, it's not my place to fix it usually, but if I can just listen, and that's what you described with your younger friend that you're still in touch with. And by the way, you talked about your Instagram feed and the positive stuff. Jon is a guy who practices what he preaches. I just want to acknowledge that. Like, when he talks about positive stuff and being of service and he means it, because he does it, he lives it. And I know enough about you to know that that's the truth. So I just want to for that. So it's an honor to have a friend like Jon. Okay, let's get to questions before we make each other cry. This is my first webinar, and I want to know how to talk to my husband when it comes to not porn. Any suggestions or tips? So Are you
Yeah.
familiar with the term, John?
Well, the first suggestion I would have is don't make it about the porn or the not porn, because that's where I see this conversation run aground so much. Is I get upset when you're looking at porn. Well, it's not porn. There's not naked people. There's no sex. What I've seen that has the best chance of getting through is talking about how you feel. So I would go more down the road of when you are looking at pictures of people that are really attractive, really provocative, and there's not a reason why you'd be looking at other than for your entertainment. I feel replaced. I feel insecure. I feel like you want that more than you want me. It's not a debate over whether or not that's what your partner actually feels. It's saying, when you do this thing, this is what it brings up in me. Again, it's that I have a right to have my triggers and my hurts and my past. And as my partner, you have a responsibility to decide how you're going to adapt your life so that you don't hurt me. And that's where I would take the conversation is, this is what hurts. This is why it hurts, not trying to define what porn is or what porn is not. It's an issue of, it could be the same thing if your spouse was, obsessed with cute puppies and they kept bringing a dog home, every couple of weeks. And the more dogs they bring home, the less attention they have for you, the less room there is for you. It's the same issue. When you do this, I feel squoze out of our relationship. I feel like I don't have a say. And that's where I would focus. Stay out of the weeds on what porn is or what it isn't.
Yeah, and if people are not familiar with the not porn, there's obvious porn. Potter Stewart, the Supreme Court justice said, I can't define porn, but I know it when I see it, which is a horrible thing to put in a Supreme Court decision, but he did it on purpose because it's so nebulous and undefinable. And it's like, you can't define what porn is or isn't. It looks different to me than it does to John than it does to somebody else. So he was saying, trying to regulate porn is a really difficult thing here, because what's porn and what's not. Not porn is, Instagram feeds, clothed but sexy pictures. It's cruising dating sites for pictures that aren't technically pornography, but are meant to trigger sexual fantasy. Not porn is used by porn addicts and sex addicts the same way they use porn, as an emotional escape. That doesn't make it any less hurtful to the betrayed partner by any stretch. It's all hurtful. It's all a betrayal. If you're shutting your betrayed partner out, you're hurting your betrayed partner, you're hurting your relationship. And any addiction, we shut our partners out, we shut our loved ones out. Alcoholics are just shutting down. We don't want to feel. Drug addicts, we're shutting down. We don't want to feel. Porn addicts, we're shutting down. We don't want to feel. All of these are a form of betrayal. And I love how John, when you, as a betrayed partner, when you approach, you make it about how this makes you feel. When you're drinking, when you're substitute whatever the problem is, when you do this, I feel, not appreciated. I feel less than. I feel pushed out of our relationship. And yeah, addicts, just be aware that that's what you're doing, whether you intend to or not. It's very hurtful to be pushed away and not seen and not acknowledged, and that's what you're doing. And you're not doing it to be hurtful. I know that. You're doing it because you had a shitty day at work, pardon my language, and you don't want to think about it or feel it. So you go on your Instagram feed for a while and just like go into la la land to get away from it. But it's hurtful to your partner. And what would be, John, what should the addict do? I had a crummy day at work and I really want to escape, and I go home and my poor wife is sitting there and all I want to do is not pay attention to her and look at my Instagram feed. What should I do as the addict in that situation?
I don't know why this phrase comes up, but it comes up for me. It's from the divorce and child custody world, the right of first refusal. This is where, couples with children, if, I'm going to be out of town and the kids need someone to watch them and it's not your weekend, the right of first refusal is you have to ask me first before you ask anybody else. I would say in a relationship that's secure functioning, you're trying to become secure functioning. When it comes to offloading stress, your partner gets the right of first refusal. So you may come home and your spouse may have this agenda like, oh, let's have this nice night together. And you may have had a shitty day at work and you're not into it at all. You may say, I am so upset about how work went today. I got a lot of feelings. I would really like to talk about it. Or if you're open, I want to tell you about it. And then if your spouse says, no, I can't take that on tonight, then you say, I might veg out for a bit. Play a video game, listen to music, read a book, go for a walk, whatever it is. But it's when you go to porn, when you go to something that is reminiscent of another human being, that's where your partner feels replaced. It would be like them saying, you come in, same discussion, and your partner saying, oh, I don't know if I can do that tonight. And you say, oh, it's fine. I'll just go talk to the neighbor lady next door. She's a good listener. She gets me. Now, if there's people in your life that you guys have agreed on, you can do that with like a sponsor or a support person. Yeah, I don't have the bandwidth for it tonight. I'm going to call my sponsor and talk about it. All right, great. There's a difference between someone who plays a role, that's a sponsor's role, versus I have this other friend who gives me what you don't give me, or who I can go to when you're not accessible. That's where people feel replaced.
Yeah, and I just want to again find the baby. I love that. That's going to stick with me. Find the baby. The baby is I had a bad day at work today, and I need somebody to see me and hear me and acknowledge that. Are you up for it? And if you're not, I'll call my sponsor,
Yeah.
or my therapist, or my recovery accountability buddy, or whatever. Yeah, I like that. Thank you. Okay, next one here. My husband and I have been separated and we're not communicating now. He has told his therapist, sponsor, and our adult sons and me that he is in recovery. I discovered he has Amazon, Netflix, Deku, Here TV, Vudu, Hulu, Google search app, YouTube, all on his TV. How does he? we're gonna have a porn conversation today. How does a porn addict recover when he's not being self-accountable? So I think the question is, you got all these apps on your TV which have mostly not porn and sometimes straight up porn. Can you be a porn addict in recovery and do that?
I think that depends on what the agreement is, not just between you and your spouse, but in the sobriety plan. I know for a lot of the guys that I work with, early recovery, a place where you could go to for a lot of, not porn, is a dangerous place. And that's what I talked about, a little earlier about needing to come to reality. It's hard. I've worked with plenty of people who have said, I don't want to give up my access to Netflix because that's how I unwind. And maybe 80% of the time they do unwind with legitimate stuff, but then 20% of the time they're cruising for sexual content. And I'll ask them, is that worth the risk? Is your recovery really that strong? Is your relationship really that strong where you can have those kind of margins of error in there? So the reality testing is not something that people early in recovery are good with. And the phrase self-accountable is really standing out to me there, because I don't think there is such a thing as self-accountability. I think accountability is something that two people give to each other willingly. So this is a great place, I think, for a sponsor, a therapist to play a role. I'll tell you what's happening. And as I'm accountable, as someone who has signed up to be in my life and help me come to reality, you're going to challenge me. I don't think it's the addict's job to put together a great recovery plan and work it and tell everybody how good it's going. It's the addict's job to experiment with a lot of different iterations of what recovery looks like and tell the truth about what's happening. I've got these apps on my TV, and that's where it lies right now. So I don't think recovery happens very well if there's not a drive to tell at least one other person the truth about what's going on for you. And honestly, the phrase "I'm in recovery" to me, it's meaningless.
I was just about to ask, can you be in recovery and still be acting out?
Yeah. Well, the term "in recovery" is so broad, and it's a catchphrase. Just like this is not to denigrate this phenomenon at all, but to me, it's on par with the way people use the word "triggered" now. Yes, being triggered talks about something real, but it's used so much it's almost lost all meaning. What does it mean to be triggered, or what does it mean for you to be in recovery? Well, in recovery, I'm actively adding positive benefit things to my life. I'm becoming healthy and whole. I'm becoming honest. What I do has an intention to it. We could go on and on defining what in recovery actually means. And that's where, as a therapist, whenever somebody says, "I want to get in recovery," usually my first question is, "What would that look like? What does that mean to you?" Because it's not just, if your recovery is just I go to meetings and I go to therapy, that's not recovery. It depends on what you do in those meetings. It depends on what you do in therapy.
Yeah, there's a term in AA, and I think it applies to any 12-step program, called dry drunk.
Yeah.
I'm not drinking and I'm going to 12-step meetings, but I'm still a real jerk. I haven't changed my thinking or my behavior at all. All I've done is take away the one thing that calmed me down, which was alcohol. And people can be in recovery for anything and still be, there's a difference between dry and sober. A sober person has all those wonderful things that Jon just described, like I'm adding to my life and actively working to make things better. And I just want to say that, look, I'm a recovering porn addict. I have Amazon, I have Netflix, I have Hulu, I have most of those. I don't know who you are, or maybe that's just YouTube. They're on my TV and I watch them, but I'm also very aware of my limitations and what I can and cannot watch. And sometimes, Netflix is wonderful for suggesting shows that I click on and I get in 3 minutes into it and think, I can't watch this show. And I have to zap it. And, I like thrillers and I like mysteries and I like sci-fi. And some of those are a little racier than others. And, I just have to skip those, such is life. So you can be in recovery with all those apps. And I'm an alcoholic too. I can go to a bar. I don't go by myself. I have an exit plan. I make sure the people I'm with know that I don't drink anymore. But I can go to a bar if there's an event or something that I need to go there. I'm just not going to pick up and drink.
There was a time in my life where having a phone supercomputer in my pocket back when I was beginning recovery would have been the worst thing in the world. And I actually resisted getting a smartphone for a really long time because I wasn't ready. I have parental controls on my phone. I can do a lot, but there's a lot that I can't do. And there's times where my spouse, my kids will ask to use my phone and they'll get annoyed because something will pop up and say this is restricted by parental controls. And it's not even like it's not a bad thing. Like I don't stream shows on my phone because I know that I'm in a better position if I'm watching in a public place where I can actually sit down and pay attention rather than trying to catch it on a small screen. Again, it's knowing the limit, and I create some annoyances for myself, but I'd rather be annoyed than in relapse.
Yeah, and by the way, parental, control software, monitoring and accountability software, however you want to phrase it, to make it less like somebody's controlling you. It's not a guarantee of sobriety. It's a roadblock that slows you down, so that you can have, first thought wrong. You can get to the second thought. Like,
it almost
maybe I shouldn't be looking at that.
Yeah, it almost works for me more like a sobriety coin. Is when that pops up, it reminds me, like, be really careful here, keep your commitments here.
Yeah. Oh yeah, this is important. And we always we'll tell people, the background on your phone, make sure it's an image of your wife or your family or something that's really important to you, so that when you pick that thing up, and I too waited on a smartphone several years before getting one, until I had to have one for work, and I finally got one. But
Yeah.
make sure you have a background on your phone that reminds you of why you're being sober, things like that. So what do I do when the betrayed partner, offered comfort to the addict when he's distressed and he rejects my soothing? That's a very good question, and it does.
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind is pull back from what you're doing and analyze why it didn't work. I think the instinct to soothe is strong in us. And that whole empathy part of the human species, it comes naturally for damn near every single one of us. It's only our circumstances that train that out of us. However, the way that we soothe and approach people, it usually has more to do with what makes sense to us than what makes sense to them. So I would pull back and wonder, do I actually understand the kind of pain that my partner's in? And do I understand the kind of soothing that's effective for them? The vast majority of couples that I work with, their attachment styles are different enough that the baseline kinds of soothing that each needs is different from the other one. So for example, I'll usually work with couples where someone's a little more distancing and somebody's a little more proximity seeking. The proximity seeking person, when they're hurting, it works really, really well to run up to them, put your arms around them and hold them until they relax. The distancing person, you do that and they're going to erupt. They're going to feel like that's an intrusion. They're going to feel like that's smothering. Doesn't matter what your intention is. Again, this is how their nervous system is set. What tends to work better for more distancing people is touch and go. So literally you might come in, touch on the shoulder, are you doing okay? And you get something gruff, then you back off and you come in and out and you check. Or even I'm working with one guy who he has a really, really difficult time with touch and soothing and all of that, especially when he's upset. But he has discovered if his partner will stay in the same room as him, that's soothing. And usually it works best for both of them if his partner is doing something else, not sitting there looking at him from across the room, but like, I'm here reading or I'm doing my thing, but that presence is there. So my first reaction would be pull back and wonder, why isn't this effective? Do I understand the kind of pain my partner's in? Do I understand what kind of soothing is effective? And then second, I would ask, what happens for you when I come in to help you? Tell me about it. You have to be in a pretty strong ego place to do that, so that you can take it as information and not just criticism. But I just get really curious about what's happening that I don't understand, because when we try something over and over again and the outcome is not what we're looking for, that usually means we don't understand the components that are in place. So those would be my suggestions there.
I just popped something in the chat feature. I'm skipping ahead a question. What parental software do you use, parental control software? We have some reviews on, I think, Dr. Rob's website. I'm a big fan of NetNanny and Custodio, and a lot of people also like Covenant Eyes, which is, I think, not listed in Rob's article. I don't know which one you use, John, but those tend to
I use a couple. So I have a router in my home that does network level filtering. And then on my devices, I'm an Android user and I use Google's Family Link.
Yeah, also good.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are both good. And they filter for your kids too. You've got kids, so
yep.
Helpful at the router level. Is it possible to skip one? No, okay. Is it possible to recover without admitting that I was/am powerless over my addiction? I always feel like I chose to do what I did. Maybe I was weak, put myself in a bad position and had no integrity, but I don't think I was powerless. Is it okay if I take this one, John?
Sure.
Okay, and then we'll go to you. I was told that I had to surrender when I came into recovery, and I was like, surrender? I did that. I got my butt kicked by my addiction. I surrender. But now it's just walking all over me. And somebody said, no, you need to surrender to reality. Surrender to the reality that you have an addiction, and then you can do something about the reality. So that was what worked for me. I don't know if you have different thoughts, John.
No, that's in line. Remember that AA, where the idea of powerlessness came from, It was, they say in the beginning of the AA book, it was 100 men. It was actually like 50 men and a handful of women. That's because alcoholics are liars.
Yes, we are.
But these were generally white, wealthy men who I think needed a dose of lessening their place in the universe. So that's where that idea of powerlessness comes from. The research on it is actually really interesting. For most people, that idea of powerlessness is actually demotivating. Unless, again, if you're more of that narcissistic personality, you probably need to admit a little more, I have a lack of control here, or I can't control everything. But for most people, I would agree wholeheartedly with what Scott said, agreeing that things are out of control, or that you can't figure this out doing what you've been doing, coming to the reality that you have an addiction, then the doors open up. But it is not necessary that the term powerless as it is understood, that is not everybody must cross this threshold. I think it's something to explore. If you need it, you got to go down that road. If you don't, if that's not your experience, Scott offers a really good alternative to that.
And I also looked at my behavior. Sometimes I would act out when I swore I wasn't going to. So that was an example of me being powerless in the moment, even though I always made the choice to engage in that behavior.
Yeah.
This is particularly evident with porn. When I went online to look at porn, I'd say, I'm only going to go on for 15 minutes. I'm going to masturbate. I'm going to be done. And 6 hours later, I'm still online looking at porn because I can't stop. Then that was another example of powerlessness. But still, I made the choice to look on porn, and I continued to make the choices. At the 15-minute mark, going, well, and I don't have anything going on tomorrow. So yeah, we actively make choices in addiction, but sometimes they get away from us. But
I also say to people, don't confuse the way out of addiction with the way you got into addiction. You are going to choose your way out of this. That doesn't necessarily mean you chose your way into it. Again, there's so many different iterations and arrangements here. I do think it's important to know what your limits are. But if powerless is not the right word for you, don't get hung up on the words. Like, grasp the concept. That concept of things are out of control is really where I think recovery starts.
I agree. As the wife of an addict, I would prepare for when my husband would be walking in the door in the evening or after being out of town, so he was not instantly flooding with all the negative of the day and everyone else's emotions. Then later in the night, if I had harder topics to talk about, I let him know that I would like to talk and I just need him to be available to listen. So that's just a comment about
how people reunite is really, really important. And I would say for any couple, make your reunions positive and comforting, and then get to the business of your relationship.
Yeah. And this continues down here. He, on the other hand, stuffs his emotions down, tries to read me and our children, and decides what he thinks needs to be said instead of being authentic. I relate to that. Our addicts/recovering addicts not able to process during the drive home, or at least prepare to be a loving and connected dad and husband, and later talk to the spouse. So
I don't know about everybody else, but I would say in my boat, yeah, I wasn't able to do that for a long time.
Yeah, me either. That's pretty typical of addicts.
Yeah,
we're very self-centered. It's all about us.
Yeah, and we don't. So when addiction happens, the part of the limbic system that is pleasure seeking and pain avoidant, that the part of the frontal lobe that's connected to that actually becomes the dominant part of the frontal lobe. So planning ahead for things that might be unpleasant and preparing is not it's not a brain strength in addiction. That has to be trained and reclaimed over time.
Yeah, addicts are, as active addicts, we avoid unpleasantness at all costs.
Yeah.
Even if it destroys friendships and relationships. And it's only when we get sober that we can finally see how important those things are.
Yeah.
So yeah, hang in there. how to connect with a partner who has disorganized attachment and severe childhood trauma. Maybe explain what disorganized attachment style is.
Yeah, so disorganized attachment is, there's basically two main attachment styles. There's a distancing style, and there's lots of different iterations in there. And then there's a proximity seeking style. Disorganized means that a person does both, and they can do it from moment to moment. It can switch really, really fast. A lot of people worry, or a lot of that, in the popular lexicon can be, oh, that person's bipolar, or that person's multiple personalities. It's really that it comes from a childhood where there was no consistent or predictable enough caregiver to get a consistent and predictable internal world. And so they're just kind of all over the place. The short answer for how to do that is learn how to watch them close and learn their history inside and out. And not just learn it once and pass the test, but be actively learning and looking for how the past bridges and connects with the present. Because the disorganized attachment can actually be, I hesitate to say treated, because it's not pathological. It's difficult to deal with, but it's not pathological. It can be helped with close attunement. And the more collaborative the two of you are on that, sometimes I fly off the handle and my feelings are too big for me. I see that. That's really hard. The more collaborative the two people are, and the more closely you watch and understand the history, the more you're able to attune and move with, rather than getting that the rigid idea of how a person is supposed to behave or feel. It just doesn't fit with a disorganized person. And it can cause more pain than it helps, saying, you must always feel this way, or why don't you respond? The very basis is getting curious about, well, that is not the response I was expecting. What happened inside of you? That's how you help a partner who is harder to find their target.
Do you recommend setting certain boundaries for difficult conversations? Particularly with somebody who's disorganized, and maybe even throwing in a safe word, pineapple, meaning I need you to back off for a second.
Absolutely. With all of this, this goes back to give help. Don't give the help that the person needs. Give the help that you can give. So having boundaries around, you can't talk to me abusively, or you can't, when I'm here to help you, you can't criticize me. You can talk about how you're angry and upset, but you can't criticize me, and hold those. It's really, really hard in the moment, especially on the disorganized person, to hold the boundary, because it'll feel like abandonment. But if you hold it consistently, they learn. Most of the time they learn, and they get it. The disorganized person isn't incapable of behaving. It's just, it doesn't come naturally. But they can learn, especially if you hold the boundary on that basic stuff. Don't abuse me, don't yell at me, don't criticize me. And then the best way to reinforce that boundary is to disengage when it happens. Let them know, hey, you did that criticism thing. I'm stepping back for a minute. And if you hold it, and there's accountability and working through it, it can get better.
Thank you, Jon. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We're out of time. A great topic again, and great questions today. Really made for an interesting session with the awesome questions. So we'll be back in a couple of weeks. Anything you want to say to take us out, Jon?
No, thank you, everybody.
Okay.
I'll see you in a couple of weeks.